So, how do I look?
Kind of like a raggy, hairy bone.
Mike, you can come out now.
Oh, boy!
Mickey, come on. Peter, Are you all right?
NBC gave 4 very different musicians a TV show in 1966, and somehow the whole thing quickly turned into one of the biggest pop culture sensations of the decade. You had Micky Dolenz with his wild energy, Davy Jones as the charming heartthrob, Mike Nesmith bringing his dry sense of humor under that wool hat, and Peter Tork as the gentle and slightly unusual soul of the group. On paper, it really should not have worked, but on screen, it became something completely different. The series only lasted for 2 seasons and 58 episodes, but that was enough to produce many hit songs and create so much Monkees mania that it made the music world very nervous. What started as a made-for-TV response to Beatlemania somehow turned into a real phenomenon all by itself. It was an equal mix of sitcom, pop music experiment, and the wonderful chaos of the 1960s. Today, we are going to count down 15 strange facts that you probably did not know about the Monkees. From the crazy casting call process and auditions that almost happened, to fake statistics, real chart records, and one failed reboot that nobody ever asked for. But before we begin, press like and subscribe to Golden Verse for more deep dives into classic TV history, and share this video with that friend who still knows every single word to Daydream Believer and refuses to feel sorry about it. Now, let's be. Number 1. The rejection that changed rock history. Now, if you want another one of those biggest what-if stories in rock history, here it is. In 1965, a 20-year-old Stephen Stills tried out for the Monkees. Musically, he did an amazing job. The guy was already a real talent. He was a strong songwriter, an excellent guitarist, and had true folk music experience. But producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider were creating a TV show, and television in 1965 had very strict ideas about what a pop idol was supposed to look like. Stills was turned down for 2 very superficial reasons. His teeth were clearly crooked, and his hairline had already started to thin. This project needed faces that looked great on television for close-up shots, cute, young, and perfect for posters. And the producers decided that Stills did not match the visual image they wanted. But here is the interesting part. They still liked him. They reportedly respected his personality and what they described as his open Nordic look. They even asked if he knew anyone with a similar style who might look better on camera. I mean, that was rude. Stills quickly suggested his friend and roommate from Greenwich Village, Peter Tork. Tork auditioned, and Tork got the role.
Didn't you ever have a crush on anybody?
Yeah, once.
So what did you do about it?
I took her to a Cub Scout meeting.
There may have been more to the story than just his looks as well. Screen Gems required the cast members to give up the publishing rights to their original songs, and Stills reportedly was not willing to give away that kind of control. So it might not have been only about his teeth, but the story about his teeth and hair stayed popular because it perfectly shows how much the Monkees were created for television first and music second. But what happened next is the part that nobody expected. If Stills had been chosen, there might have been no Buffalo Springfield with Neil Young, and for that matter, no Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Later, no Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Instead of being shaped into a sitcom star, he became one of the most important musicians of his generation and the first person ever to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice on the same night in 1997, all because his teeth apparently were not ready for television.
Number 2. The band that was cast like a sitcom. Yes, before they became a real band, the Monkees were basically the result of a casting call. That is right. One of the most commercially successful bands of the late 1960s did not begin in a garage or a smoky nightclub. They began in a television producer's office. In 1965, producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider came up with the idea for an American Beatles-style comedy series for NBC. Their first idea was not to create a band from the ground up, though. They wanted to cast an already existing group. Their original choice was the Lovin' Spoonful, but John Sebastian had already signed the band to a record contract, which would have prevented Screen Gems from promoting and selling the show's music. That deal was finished, so Rafelson and Schneider changed their plan and decided to cast individual performers instead. And they already had one important piece ready. Davy Jones had signed a long-term contract with Screen Gems in September of 1964.
Anywhere for your smile, everywhere I sing.
Earning a Tony nomination for Best Featured Actor in a Musical in 1963. He was already Broadway royalty before the first Monkee ever played a single note. Then came the advertisement. In 1965, Daily Variety and The Hollywood Reporter published a casting call looking for, and this is their exact quote, 4 crazy boys who are rock and folk musicians willing to act in a new TV series. A total of 437 people showed up. Only 4 were chosen for the job. Nesmith was the only one who actually saw the advertisement and walked in on his own. Tork was told about it by a friend who had already auditioned and failed, but we will get to that story soon. And Dolenz, well, he had already starred as a child lead in the 1950s television series Circus Boy under the name Mickey Braddock. By 1965, he was going to different auditions when news reached him about the project. So, one of the biggest bands of the 1960s was not formed in a rehearsal room, it was simply put together in a casting room. And that manufactured beginning followed them everywhere.
Number 3. The Liquid Paper Connection. You want one of the strangest rock and roll backstories ever? Michael Nesmith's mother invented liquid paper. Yes, that same liquid paper, the small white bottle that saves secretaries all across America from having to type an entire page again because of one small mistake. In the mid-1950s, Betty Nesmith Graham was working as a secretary at Texas Bank and Trust, and she became frustrated with the new electric typewriters. The carbon film ribbons made it very hard to correct mistakes neatly, so she did what any creative person might do. She mixed white temper paint in her kitchen blender, poured it into nail polish bottles, and then began painting over typing errors at work. She called it Mistake Out. Then she was fired in 1958 after the company name started appearing on bank letters where the bank's name was supposed to be. But instead of giving up, she focused on the business full-time. She later renamed it Liquid Paper, and in 1979 she sold the entire company to Gillette for $47.5 million. As a teenager, Michael had helped her fill the bottles in the garage, and that teenager later grew up to become the Monkee who always wore the wool hat. When Betty passed away in 1980, Nesmith inherited half of her estate, which was worth more than $25 million. And this is where the story becomes even more interesting. At that time, he was basically broke. Creditors were placing tags on his furniture. He went from that situation to receiving a huge fortune almost overnight. And what did he do with the money? Well, he supported music projects, helped finance films, and served as executive producer for the cult classic Repo Man, quietly building one of the most interesting careers after the Monkees in the entertainment business.
Number 4. The Monkee who almost became the Fonz. In 1973, Micky Dolenz auditioned for the role of Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli on Happy Days. By that time, Dolenz was going through a difficult period. After the show ended in 1968, he had been trying to rebuild his career as a serious actor, but Hollywood was not very interested. Whenever he walked into an audition, casting directors would ask,
"What are you doing here?"
So when Happy Days came along, he worked very hard to get the role of Fonzie, and he came very close to getting it. I mean, really close. In the end, it came down to him and a then unknown graduate from the Yale School of Drama named Henry Winkler. Dolenz later said that Winkler saw him in the waiting room and thought that he had already lost the role, because who would choose an unknown actor over someone who had already starred in a successful TV show? The two men later became good friends and have been laughing about the situation ever since. Height was also part of the decision. Dolenz is about 6 feet tall and would have looked much taller than Ron Howard and the rest of the cast. Marshall wanted the actors to be at about the same eye level, and Winkler, who is 5 feet 6 inches tall, fit that requirement.
Well, let me tell you something. You're not going anywhere, lady. The Fonz wants to dance.
But what finally decided it was a producer who saw Winkler playing a tough street kid wearing a leather jacket in a low-budget movie called The Lords of Flatbush and supported him strongly enough to change Marshall's decision. Dolenz never felt bad about losing the role. He has always been very honest about that. Winkler truly fit the role in a way that he never could have matched. The New York attitude and the natural street-level cool were not things you could easily pretend to have if you grew up in Southern California. Dolenz later moved to England and created a new career for himself as a producer and director. Winkler went on to become the biggest television star of the 1970s. Just a few inches of height difference and one low-budget movie were enough to completely change both of their lives.
Number 5. The band almost had a terrible name.
Before they were the Monkees, they were almost something completely different, and it was not good. Producers were trying to create a name that sounded like it fit the British invasion style, something sharp, a little playful, and easy to print on a lunchbox. One early option was the Creeps. Yes, imagine NBC trying to sell that to parents in 1966. "Oh, don't worry, honey, I'm just going to watch the Creeps." Network executives reportedly felt that name sounded a bit too much like juvenile delinquent material for primetime television. Another idea was the Inevitables, which sounds less like a pop band and more like a high school debate club. It was meant to suggest that their success was unavoidable, but it did not really create teen idol excitement. So they eventually settled on the Monkees, spelled M-O-N-K-E-E-S, a deliberate twist on monkeys, following the British invasion trend of slightly altered, playful band names. It was simple, catchy, a bit rebellious, and much better than trying to explain to your parents why you had a poster of the Creeps on your wall. It also gave them an instantly recognizable guitar-shaped logo that basically printed money. The Monkees it was, and somewhere a lunchbox designer was very relieved.
Number 6. The ones who didn't make it. When the Monkees held their casting call in 1965, hundreds of people showed up, and a few names from that almost list might surprise you. Harry Nilsson did not make it into the band, but he impressed the producers so much that they bought his songs. Cuddly Toy ended up on Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones, Ltd., helping establish Nilsson as a serious songwriter and launching a career that later produced Without You and Everybody's Talkin'. Paul Williams also auditioned. Yes, the future songwriter behind We've Only Just Begun, Rainy Days and Mondays, and Rainbow Connection. He did not get the role, but he still went on to become one of the most successful songwriters of the decade. And Danny Hutton also did not make the final group, but he later formed Three Dog Night, which dominated the early 1970s charts. Now, to clear up one rumor, no, Charles Manson did not audition. That is a persistent urban legend, but Manson was in prison during the 1965 casting calls. And here's the interesting part. The rumor actually started as a joke. Micky Dolenz made an offhand comment about it on a podcast, and the internet's
Number 7. The black box they were kept in. Now, here is one of the strangest behind-the-scenes details of the Monkees. By season 2, the producers had a problem. The 4 stars were becoming more rebellious, and between scenes they would wander around the studio lot, crack jokes, disappear, and sometimes even let the smell of something suspicious drift through the set. They would do anything except stand quietly on standby. So the studio built what became known as the Black Box, a soundproof, windowless, air-conditioned room constructed underneath the soundstage. It had one door with a meat locker-style handle. Inside were a few pillows, a couple of candles, and a set of 4 light bulbs mounted on the wall, one for each Monkee, with their names written underneath. When your light flashed, it meant you had to go on set immediately. The official reason was efficiency, but the real reason was that studio executives did not want these long-haired musicians wandering around the Columbia lot between takes. Now, was it literally a prison? No, but symbolically, it definitely says a lot. Here were 4 guys playing a free-spirited band on TV, while actually sitting in a windowless holding room beneath the soundstage, owned by the studio, scheduled down to the minute, waiting for a light bulb to tell them when they were needed. And yet, there is an irony here. Inside that box, they actually bonded. They jammed together. They developed a tight musical shorthand and vocal harmony that later helped fuel their push for creative control. What started as a studio efficiency idea became a pressure cooker, and accidentally a rehearsal space for... Number 8. 4 number-1 albums in a single year. Yes, that really happened. Now here is a record that still stands today, and it belongs to a band that a large part of the music industry did not take seriously. In 1967 alone, the Monkees had 4 different albums reach number 1 on the Billboard 200. Those albums were The Monkees, More of the Monkees, Headquarters, and Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones, Ltd. 4 number-1 albums in 1 calendar year, and no other act, not even the Beatles, not Elvis, not anyone, has ever matched that. And the singles kept pace. Last Train to Clarksville, I'm a Believer, and Daydream Believer all hit number 1 on the Hot 100. I'm a Believer, written by Neil Diamond, stayed at the top for 7 weeks and became one of the best-selling singles of the entire decade.
Now I'm a believer.
More of the Monkees alone spent 18 weeks at number 1, sold over 5 million copies in the US, and finished 1967 as the best-selling album of the year during one of the most competitive periods in all of music history. The TV show aired every week,
Kids watched the episodes and then rushed out to buy the records. It was a feedback loop that made Cole Gem's records very, 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 very rich. And at their peak, record sales were even passing the show's own ratings. Now here is the part that has been repeated so many times that it feels like a fact. Spoiler, it is not. For decades, you have probably heard this claim. In 1967, the Monkees outsold the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined. It has been printed in Rolling Stone, The Washington Post, books, documentaries, and countless YouTube comments. But there is one problem. Michael Nesmith made it up. In a 1977 interview, Nesmith casually told journalists that the Monkees had sold over 35 million records in 1967, more than the Beatles and the Rolling Stones combined. The reporters wrote it down and published it as fact, but Nesmith later admitted it was completely made up. His exact words were, "complete fabrication, totally bogus, Class A malarkey lie." He even repeated the story to Gilbert Gottfried in 2015, still clearly amused that it spread so far. And here's the thing. The real truth was already very impressive. The Monkees did outsell the Beatles in U.S. album sales in both 1966 and 1967. They released more material, they had a weekly TV show that pushed record sales, and More of the Monkees was the best-selling album of the entire year. They were genuinely the biggest-selling act in America for a period of time. But the part about combined sales with the Rolling Stones and the 35 million figure, that was pure Nesmith mischief, and the music press repeated it for almost 50 years.
Number 9. The Wrecking Crew Secret and the Showdown that changed everything. Now here is something the Monkees fan club newsletter definitely was not advertising. The band barely played on their own early hit albums. The first 2 records were created almost completely by professional songwriters and the Wrecking Crew, the same group of elite session musicians who also played on records for the Beach Boys, Frank Sinatra, and much of 1960s radio. The Monkees came in, sang the lead vocals, and then left. That was the arrangement, and for a while it worked. Music supervisor Don Kirshner ran the operation like a hit-making machine, with Boyce and Hart, Jack Keller, and Jeff Barry handling production. The record sold millions, but the band was unhappy. Things reached a breaking point in January 1967 when Kirshner released More of the Monkees without even informing them. There was no input on the track list, no approval of the cover photo, which had been taken from a promotional shoot without the band knowing, and the liner notes were mostly Kirshner praising himself, with barely any mention of the band. The Monkees did not even receive copies of the album at first. They had to buy it themselves from a record store. So Michael Nesmith had finally had enough. During a confrontation with Kirshner at the Beverly Hills Hotel, Nesmith punched a hole in the wall and reportedly told him, "That could have been your face." Kirshner did not take the warning. He later released a single in Canada without approval from the band, producers, or record executives. That was the final straw. Kirshner was fired, and the Monkees finally gained full creative control. So what did they do with it? Headquarters. It was produced by Chip Douglas. It hit number 1 for exactly 1 week before getting knocked off by Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Awesome album. Now, the one time they proved they were a real band, one of the greatest albums in rock history showed up and immediately took the top spot from them. Headquarters then spent the next 11 weeks stuck at number 2 throughout the entire Summer of Love. But the unity did not last. By the time they were recording The Birds, the Bees, and the Monkees in 1968, the group had started to fall apart creatively. Instead of working together like a band, each member was doing his own thing, recording solo tracks that were still released under the Monkees name. They fought for creative control and they got it, but then quickly used it to go in 4 completely different directions. Ain't that?
Number 10. The Three Stooges DNA. Now, a surprising amount of what you saw on screen in the Monkees was actually borrowed. Literally. Both the Monkees and the Three Stooges were produced under Screen Gems, a division of Columbia Pictures, which meant the show had a secret advantage, an entire studio-backed collection of props, sets, and costumes just sitting there, ready to be reused. And when your TV budget is basically held together with tape and hope, you use whatever is already available in the building. The show was filmed on the Columbia Pictures lot, the same Hollywood space where the Three Stooges had made 190 short films over more than 2 decades. Sets were reused in redressed versions of older Columbia productions, mad scientist labs, chaotic living rooms, banquet halls. The same sets would appear again and again in different forms. If it felt like the Monkees' world was built from leftover pieces, that is because it really was. In a couple of Season 1 episodes, Peter Tork appeared wearing pajamas with a bunny design on the front. Those were not made for the show. They were the same pajamas worn by Curly Howard in a Three Stooges short from the early 1940s. The gentle, soft-spoken Monkee wearing Curly's actual pajamas nearly 25 years later, not because anyone planned it as a tribute, but because it was in the costume department and the budget basically said, well. Number 11. Head, the psychedelic middle finger that nobody saw coming. In 1968, the Monkees did something no one expected. They made a movie that was designed to break their own image. The film was called Head, and it was the complete opposite of their clean, family-friendly NBC sitcom.
Hey, what's wrong?
What's wrong with you?
I asked you first.
I ordered this and I don't want it.
Throw it away.
Gone were the sped-up chase scenes and beach house jokes. In their place came surreal visuals, non-linear storytelling, Vietnam-era themes, and a strong feeling of "what did I just watch" energy. Now, the whole project started at a resort in Ojai, California, where the band, Bob Rafelson and Jack Nicholson, spent a week recording ideas into a tape recorder. Nicholson, who at that time was a struggling writer-actor that most people had never heard of, took those recordings and turned them into a screenplay. The film openly mocked the Monkees' manufactured beginnings, broke down their pop star image, and basically challenged the audience to take them seriously. And then, almost nobody showed up. Part of that was kind of intentional in a way. The original movie poster did not even show the Monkees. No band photos, no clear branding, just a close-up of an unknown man's head. So if you were a Monkees fan looking at theater listings, you would have no idea the film was even connected to them. Roger Ebert summed it up simply. Fans were offended by it, and non-fans avoided it completely. The result was that Head earned a total of $16,111 on a $750,000 budget. That is like paying your rent using spare change from your couch. And what makes it even crazier is this. Nicholson's very next project was Easy Rider. The same guy who co-wrote one of the biggest box office failures of 1968 went on to help create one of the most important films of the entire decade. Davy Jones later said very honestly that the band felt like pawns in something they helped build but could not control, like they were thrown into something that had already moved beyond them. Still, the movie eventually found an audience and became a cult classic, even earning a Criterion Collection release. Today, it is considered one of the strangest and most interesting films of Number 12. NBC's worst pilot. The original pilot for the Monkees tested so poorly that it set a record for the lowest test scores of any pilot in NBC history. The pilot had been filmed in late 1965 on a very small budget. The guys wore their own clothes in most scenes because there was not enough money for costumes. So yes, the production quality was about what you would expect. But the bigger issue was the format. The fast-cut, chaotic, almost slapstick style confused test audiences. They did not know who these guys were, why they should care, or even what they were watching. So producer Bob Rafelson did something very smart. He re-edited the pilot and added something at the beginning: test screen footage. Loose, candid, almost documentary-style clips that let viewers actually meet the guys before the chaos started. And it worked. The recut version scored one of the highest pilot test ratings NBC had ever seen. The same footage, just a different structure and a completely different result. NBC became so confident that they ordered 2 full seasons immediately. For a show that had been considered dead just weeks earlier, that was unheard of. And once the show aired... Number 13. The Monkees basically invented the music video. The music video era did not start with MTV. It actually started right here. Every episode included at least one musical romp, a self-contained performance sequence that often had nothing to do with the plot. The story would stop, the song would begin, and suddenly you were watching something that felt more like a mini-film than a sitcom. And these were not simple stage performances. They used rapid-fire editing synced to the beat, jump cuts, sped-up footage, breaking the fourth wall, location montages, and chaotic but stylish visuals that were about 15 years ahead of where most television was at the time. Those weekly musical sequences helped turn songs like I'm a Believer and Last Train to Clarksville into full pop culture events. The show proved that television could boost record sales by pairing songs with strong, memorable visuals, and in doing so, it accidentally created the blueprint for the modern music video. The connection goes even further than that, though. In the late 1970s, Michael Nesmith created Pop Clips, a cable program that showed music videos with on-air hosts, becoming one of the first American shows to use what would later be called video jockeys, or VJs.
Hi, I'm Jack Armstrong, and this is Pop Clips, where the music is in motion. And for the next 30 minutes, we're going to have some of the most incredible active rock and roll for you today that you could ask for on television.
The executives who saw it immediately understood what they had. The idea was developed further, and on August 1st, 1981, it launched as MTV. And Nesmith was not finished there.
His 1981 video project, Elephant Parts, won the very first Grammy Award for Best Video Album, helping to establish music videos as a real art form. Then, in 1986, MTV aired a Monkees marathon. A whole new generation discovered the show that had quietly helped create the format they had grown up watching. The Monkees started it. MTV just gave it a channel. Number 14. The cancellation that wasn't. The Monkees were not canceled in the way most people think. When the show ended in 1968 after 2 seasons, it was not because ratings collapsed or NBC suddenly turned against prefab pop bands. The real story is more complicated and more interesting. By season 2, the band had been fighting for more creative control, writing their own songs, playing their own instruments, and shaping the music in their own direction. But the TV show was still based on light slapstick comedy. The group was getting tired of repeating the same formula every week. So when discussions about a 3rd season began, the Monkees proposed changing the entire format. They wanted something like a variety show, closer to Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, not another cycle of scripted stories where Davy falls for a girl, Peter gets kidnapped, and Mike just stands around looking slightly confused. NBC refused and said they would only continue if the format stayed the same. The Monkees chose to walk away. But it was not just stubbornness from either side. Major sponsors had already started pulling back during season 2, which made renewal even harder. And by that point, the band was already heavily involved in filming Head, the psychedelic project mentioned earlier, so their focus had moved elsewhere. So calling it a cancellation is technically true, but it was more like a mutual breakup where both sides had already moved on. For a group that started as a manufactured television experiment, choosing to leave on their own terms was a strong final statement.
Number 15. From MTV Resurrection to the new Monkees disaster. Now on February 23, 1986, MTV aired a nearly 23-hour marathon of the original series to celebrate its 20th anniversary. They called it Pleasant Valley Sunday. It was meant to be just a nostalgia filler, but instead it sparked Monkee Mania 2. Teenagers who had not even been born in the 1960s fell in love with the band. MTV and Nickelodeon began airing episodes daily. Multiple Monkees albums re-entered the Billboard charts at the same time. The originally manufactured band was once again outselling many current artists. Micky Dolenz, Davy Jones, and Peter Tork reunited for a large tour that became one of the top-grossing live acts of 1986. They also scored a new top 20 hit with That Was Then, This Is Now, although Davy Jones did not take part in the recording, leaving Dolenz and Tork to handle it. It was chaotic, unexpected, and completely real. And then Hollywood, of course, tried to recreate it. In September 1987, a reboot called The New Monkees premiered.
Hi! Hi! Hi!
Hi, we're New Monkee.
Right you are, Larry. We made this tape especially for our friends at Warner Brothers.
New cast, new house, but the same basic idea. Out of roughly 3,000 applicants, producers selected Jared Chandler, Dino Kovas, Marty Ross, and Larry Saltis. Unlike the original group, these performers were chosen mainly for their existing musical skills. Their setup was a brightly colored neon mansion featuring an electronic butler and a talking computer named Helen. It was very different from the beach house that audiences had loved 20 years earlier. Behind the scenes, the project was also hurt by a common Hollywood problem. The TV series was produced by Columbia Pictures Television, while the album was released by Warner Brothers. Each side waited for the other to generate interest, so promotion did not really happen. There was no coordinated effort. To make things worse, the original Monkees filed a lawsuit over the use of the name. The case was eventually settled out of court, but the public image was already damaged. 22 episodes were planned, but only 13 were aired. In just 1 year, the Monkees went from a major MTV-era comeback to a reboot that was quickly rejected and disappeared almost immediately. And there you have it, 15 strange facts you probably did not know about the Monkees. Which one surprised you the most? And which Monkees moment still sticks in your memory? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe for more nostalgic deep dives, and share this with someone who still hears, "Hey, hey, we're the Monkees," and starts singing instantly. Until next time.